Hey guys, welcome to NAMA episode 27. Let us know, as always, if the video's working and if our sound is coming in clear. We'll get started in just a moment here. We'll let some people filter in. Sorry, we're getting started a little late. Some of the dogs are a little whiny, and so we moved them around so they wouldn't bark during the live stream.
Fingers crossed.
Hopefully, yes, indeed. It looks like our stream health is a little lower than normal. Hopefully that won't be too big of a problem. As always, if you want to ask us follow-up questions or ask us brand new questions, you're welcome to. Make sure to post them on Patreon if you want us to see them quickly. Otherwise, you can post them to YouTube and Facebook, and we'll see them eventually, hopefully. But yeah, Patreon is the best way to see that, although that may be changing in the near future. Keep your eyes peeled for updates. We're potentially moving to a new platform. Patreon won't be going anywhere anytime soon, but we're going to be moving a lot of our lessons into a more coherent kind of landing spot. It's a way better. You guys will like it. I think.
You'll be able to find posts and topics of interest a lot more easily and more built for our kind of content. So.
Yes. So any updates? What about the book club?
Expect to post in the next week or two. I am doing a webinar on blank searches for Scentwork University. So if you have either any questions that you want answered or anything you think should be addressed in a presentation like that, I know a bunch of you already gave me some great ideas on Facebook, but if there's anyone else who hasn't yet, I would love to get your thoughts and incorporate them into that.
Absolutely. I wanted to thank everyone on Patreon who contributed to my
Video Blitz.
Yeah, no, not to the Video Blitz, although I do want to thank you. I thought that went really well, and I'm really looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, we are. We decided it's going to be barring like being out of town, the sort of set date will be the second Monday of the month.
Yeah.
With NAMA as the third Monday or the fourth Monday of the month. So it's the second and fourth Monday.
The same as NAMA. If you're tier 5 or above, you can submit videos to that and you're going to have higher priority. If no one submits anything, then we will pull from anybody who submits videos. But if you're 5 or above, start sending videos if you'd like them analyzed, want to contribute, or have specific things you'd like to see. Maybe we can dig up a video of ourselves that illustrates a point or something like that. But I wanted to thank people who sent in the videos when I asked for the webinar I'll be doing on how to create a training plan for Dog Sport University or Scentwork University, I guess. There's multiple of them. So we both do webinars there regularly. Natalie does classes there all the time. It's a great platform. Make sure to check it out. But I was asked to do a webinar, and I'm collecting videos, and we're going to put together a quick lecture on how to make a training plan and how to implement that. So thank you so much. I got all the videos I need, and I'm really excited.
And it seems like that has been a topic on people's mind because I think you've gotten a request from a few different directions. So if any of you are interested or know someone who would benefit from that, we'll put it out there when it's going to be live, and so you can send it to them.
Yeah. So let's see. I don't have a rant idea off the top of my head right now. Do you have a rant?
No, I was looking at the list.
None of them are really speaking to me.
Yeah, we've done a lot of them already.
So let me put one out there. This will be more of a discussion. So I want to hear your answers to this question. Which is worse? Missing a hide or false alerting? Of the ways to fail a search, which is worse? Okay. What do you think? Is there one that's better or worse? Are they better or worse depending on the scenario you're in? Do you feel differently about different dogs? I know some people who are they don't care about missing hides because they have false alerting problems as long as they don't false alert. And I know other people who don't care about false alerting at all. They just want to make sure they hit every hide. And even if they false a couple times, if they find every hide, they consider that a win.
And I think different levels of trial make a huge difference. Like when people were prepping when they were trying to get into the last nationals, They wanted as many points as possible. So missing hides were terrible because then you miss an entire hide's worth of points. But falsing was terrible because then you lose half a hide's worth of points. But I think people were leaning towards just wanting to get all the hides. I tend towards more of a blurred alert problem. I get excited and I want something to happen and I call an alert. And I usually already know that it's wrong. I'm not surprised when I get a no when that happens. And so I would generally rather not get any no's because that means I'm doing better with my not blurred alerting. But from a more general like scoring perspective, I think I would rather miss a hide than false. I would rather not give away points that I already have. And I also think that if you're missing a hide, it's probably usually an easier fix or a quicker fix than if you have a genuine false alert problem. My false alert problem is not my dog's problem; it's mine.
Yep, I'm put this on the screen so anybody who logs in gets to see it. But answer this question. Give us your response. We'll keep an informal tally of how many people think it's worse to miss a hide versus falsing. And at the end, we'll kind of go through them and give our responses. Also, if you have a reason why, give that justification for why you think one way or another. This could be really interesting. I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say about that. So anyways, we don't have as many questions this month. So we're going to get right to it. The questions are kind of big, so hopefully we'll get through them all. And then if you have some extra questions, we'll get to them. And otherwise,
then we'll talk about the question.
Yeah. Also, one more update. We're going to be releasing merch for you guys, shirts and sweaters. And so if you are interested in, supporting us in another way, we'll be very happy for you to buy our merch. So, and we'll probably give them away at some point too.
Yeah. Once we've got some, they'll be part of we'll get back to doing NAMA giveaways.
Yeah.
But we hope to get those out really soon. So there'll be a post when they come out.
So let's get to question number 1. So can you discuss the different odor challenges in AKC versus NACSW and how to best train for those challenges? Good question. Thank you. So Natalie's an AKC judge, and we both train both, if you want to call them styles, although they're not even really styles. So the first thing I want to say before I kind of hand it off to Natalie, because we actually disagree on this, I think, a little bit.
And in the opposite direction as you might
expect. Yeah, it's true. But this is the way I feel about it. In general, people don't really go to an AKC agility class or what's the other? USDA agility class. You don't pick which one, right? And you don't really train one style or another. There isn't really a style. There is a difference. The venues are not the same, but agility is agility. You need the same skills. Even if AKC is quote unquote easier, you still need the basic same skills. Or
harder, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, or whichever you believe, right? And NACSW and AKC trials are actually just the same. There isn't a challenge that's more difficult in one than the other. The only thing you could say is odor's a little differently scented. And for some dogs, that makes a little bit of a difference. And for some dogs, it makes no difference. And for a very, very small portion of dogs, it makes a lot of a difference. But that's a very small portion of dogs that actually have that problem. But for example, buried and submersed hides, right? That's the big difference, right, between AKC and NACSW. My experience has been with absolutely.
So NACSW did submerged hides at the third nationals years and years and years.
Yeah,
ago.
sure. And we did them in training before that. But my experience has been with zero preparation. If the dog has high level of odor obedience, the dog has no trouble. With a lot of preparation, the dog has low odor obedience. Doesn't matter. The preparation doesn't help. They still false. They still miss hides. So the deciding factor in succeeding in any venue seems to be odor obedience, not preparation for a specific set of skills.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything to add about that?
Well, I'll say some specific stuff about odor, but I don't know if you want to talk about your thoughts on odor, because that's where we actually differ.
Go ahead.
Okay, so AKC odor, if you don't know, is significantly stronger than NACSW. They put 2 drops of oil per Q-tip, which is significantly more odor. I think the dogs need exposure to whatever they're going to be trialing with, plus a bit broader than that, because otherwise they're going to have to be solving a new problem in trial, and that's going to take you more time than you're going to have. I tend towards setting NACSW strength probably 75% of the time in classes, AKC strength the other 25%. But I'm not like rigid on that. Those are just sort of what I tend to. I like setting AKC odor for allowing it to pool faster, and letting the dogs work through that. But I also don't really feel that it's necessary to expose them to huge amounts of odor all the time, which is part of why I tend towards NACSW level odor. I think as a judge, one of the challenges of AKC is how many parameters are put on the judges of, like you can see in the rule book, the size that the search area can be. It's a relatively small range. So you have to fit your search, like for novice or whatever, 400 square feet or whatever it is, depending on the class. And so, I think trials tend to look rather similar. But they're also pretty small areas at the lower levels. And so you may have a very small area with a gigantic amount of odor filling up the whole space, especially in tiers is where it seems to cause more issues than any other element. And so if the dog hasn't been exposed and doesn't have good drive to source, they're going to have problems. The first AKC trial I judged was the first in Southern California. And I saw a lot of dogs who had limited exposure to AKC odor. And some had been working on it for maybe 4 to 6 months. And the dogs, and it was a hard search. And the dogs who passed the search were the ones that work on odor obedience and drive to source every week. And there were dogs that I know, and a lot of those had maybe seen it once or twice. And there were dogs who had been working on it for a long time that were working on more like inaccessible, high level, supposedly advanced stuff, that the dogs just didn't bother to drive to source and just made a decision somewhere. So I absolutely agree. Odor obedience and drive to source are the most important. And if the dog thinks their criteria is something other than drive to source, you're going to have problems. But that's true in both venues. And I think buried in water are really fun, but it's worth, to me, taking the time to give the dog some exposure as opposed to just throwing them into it. Because yes, the dog could do it, but they're probably not going to do it in the time limit if they've never done it before. And with the handler being stressed out about it being a competition. Because I do think that for a lot of dogs, until they have been more exposed, it takes much longer than like a container search to figure out exactly where the odor is.
Yeah, I'll have to actually test that. Because I've never done any of those with Lumi.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that she might take her marginally. Like, I'm not going to place, but I'll do it in the time limit.
Yeah.
And
but
I
you
don't
also
like
are pretty good
doing
at keeping your nerves
search.
under control.
That's true. So I'm just
I think all those container searches can make things a little more boring for the dog.
Yeah, that's why I don't like doing container search. That's why if I was going to practice submerged or buried, I wouldn't do it the way AKC does it. I would just bury a hide or just throw a hide in a stream or something like that.
And in my water hides course, I have people take a break from doing it in containers and do it in kiddie pools or streams or whatever you have access to.
Yep.
So it also broadens the dog's understanding of how odor works in water.
Yep.
And it helps it not be container searches over and over. But I also do a lot of sourceable hides, even in water hides. Harder to do with buried, but you can make it work with water.
So I'm just going to briefly go through my view of AKC odor and the problems with it or not, because I've said it before. And then something came to my mind of specific challenges that do come up that should be mentioned. So real quick, we've got 2 dogs. One dog has only ever seen AKC level odor his whole life. The other dog has only ever seen NACSW odor his whole life. Okay. And so we're going to take each of these dogs and compete them in the opposite venue.
Well, and you kind of need to define what you mean by NACSW odor, because dogs tend to see more of a range.
No, I'm just going to say trial standard.
Okay.
So trial standard competition odor, because if you're training your dog right, then you vary the dog's odor threshold. Okay. And if you're only trained in competition, then you limit yourself to the rule book, and that will make your dog worse. So anyways, we're going to cross venue them. So we take the NACSW dog. Let's take the NACSW dog and throw him into the AKC trial. What I see happening a lot. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know what's going on with YouTube. It seems to be booting us off for some reason. So I'm going to let just get a minute to get people back in. I'm going to double check that Patreon's actually working.
Make sure people refresh the page. Yeah, several people think it's working now.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, fortunately, I do know exactly where I was, so I can go ahead and pick up where I left off. So we're going to cross train these dogs. So the NACSW dog goes and works the AKC trial. And my experience is that he goes in and he gets overwhelmed with the odor being so strong that he's unable to make it all the way to source, and he fringes. Okay. And on the other side, the AKC dog goes into an NACSW search, and if the dog has learned how to hunt, which isn't a given with AKC odor because not every trainer trains the dogs to hunt. But if the dog gets into the odor cone, the dog may show a change of behavior that the handler can read. So the problem for the AKC dog is that might not actively go out and hunt for it, and that when he gets to it, he may not recognize it because it's too little, but he will demonstrate a change of behavior. Just like the NACSW dog displays a change of behavior, the problem is the change of behavior is too far away. So for those reasons, I'd rather have a dog that is pushes to the highest concentration rather than is so sensitive that they fringe and false regularly. That's a problem I had with my dog originally and actually held me back in NACSW trials. And one of the ways I fixed that was using a higher threshold of odor for a long time. And that was before AKC odor came around. Now that AKC odor is here, I pretty much train exclusively on AKC odor.
And for me, I think a lot of that comes down to training, especially because I've watched a lot of dogs who started with NACSW and then started trialing in AKC when it came out. And I think with a really good foundation and a really strong drive to source, it's very easy to transition them up or down. But I would probably rather start my foundation on a little less and then transition up. But I also don't know really how much of a difference that makes.
Yeah, well, we will have to talk about that because in our classes, we start high and transition down, and we've always done that from the beginning.
Not as high
not
as
as
AKC,
high.
Not nearly as high.
Yeah, not as high as AKC, but we usually start higher than what our goal target threshold is.
But slightly.
Okay.
Really negligibly.
So anyways, the point I wanted to make about prepping for different challenges of AKC versus NACSW, there are a few. So here they are. One is that in AKC trials, you may want to get your dog prepared for multi-day trialing quicker because you may compete for a whole weekend faster than you would do that in NACSW trials.
Way faster.
The other thing you're going to want to do is prep your dog to handle crowded staging areas and preparatory areas. Most AKC trials or AKC trials don't have the same rules about dog etiquette that NACSW does. So where in NACSW, it's a hard rule about don't have dogs out of the car unless they're potting or working.
And keep them, significant distance away from each other.
Yes. In AKC, they're not hard rules. Hosts can implement some amount of control over that, and some do and some don't. So it's really host dependent. Make sure you know the host you're going to compete under. But you will want to condition your dog to being able to work close to another dog, and maybe with dogs in a very close ring, or working in a ring that was previously used by another search with residual odor in it.
Yes, and potentially working one search area with another search area not that far away.
Yes, where odor's blowing in from another search area, which is something you have to do in elite with you can't go back searches, right?
Yeah.
But at AKC, you may have to work on that at novice level.
Yeah, and there are even some times where there's like a physical barrier like a tarp.
Yeah.
But dogs could still be working within the same larger room, and they've kind of sectioned it off. But if you have a very sensitive dog to other dogs, that is probably not the place to start. though, they may be able to get to being able to do those things. But I would be, cautious with my dog.
Yeah.
Especially and I'm very cautious with my dogs in that the first AKC agility trial I went to with my dog aggressive dog, I decided it was going to move us backwards and never did another one with her.
Yeah.
Because everyone was on top of each other. There wasn't a culture of being careful, and it just was not worth it to me. So, some dogs can handle it really well. Also, some venues are more spread out. Some hosts are, being more careful of it. And you can also help your local groups, if you're involved, to be more, and it's not like we have to be careful of the reactive dogs thing, but just to having general etiquette for other dogs' space.
Yeah, my dogs are not reactive. If you know me, I don't believe in the term reactive.
None of
They're
our
not
current
aggressive,
dogs are
but
like that.
I still appreciate people minding their dogs and staying out of my face and controlling their dogs. I like that. I like being able to feel comfortable with my dog. My dogs are under control. I feel like everyone else's dog should be under control. And so that's something I feel.
All right, next question.
Yeah, let's move on to the next question. We're getting lots of really interesting responses. So don't forget, there is a question right down here at this portion of the screen. Question for patrons: is it worse to miss a hide or false alert? We're asking you this question, and people are voting in the comments. We're getting a lot of different opinions. We may read some of those opinions in a bit.
Yeah.
So anyways,
that'd be good.
Next question. When the wind is coming from the left. Oh, sorry. When the wind is coming from, say, left to right across the element, container, car, exterior, would you start along the right or the left side? So this is a question we get from our students all the time. And do you want to take the lead on this one to begin with?
Sure. So I think in, say, an NW1, where that there's one hide, it can be very advantageous to go along. So if the wind is blowing this way, to go along this side to let your dog catch the odor and work their way in, assuming that you have trained them to work around objects and all of that to get to odor, which you should have if you're doing NW1. In, say, NW2 and NW3 Elite, potential for a number of hides. I actually personally often work upwind. Is that the right terminology?
With the wind or against the wind?
With the wind.
The wind blowing away from you?
Yeah. So the wind is going this way and
downwind.
I'm moving this way.
There's some debate about whether downwind is moving downwind or moving it, but
yeah, because I always think of this downwind and this is upwind. So I'm working
downwind
into the downwind direction without the wind in my face. And I think that can help the dog focus on the odors as they run into them, instead of having, say, 3 hides blowing in their face at the beginning and they're having to pick. Okay, I'm going to do this one first, then I'm going to do this one, then I'm going to do that one. And that can work. But I don't have to wonder if we skipped one back here to get one up there if we approach them the other direction. So I don't intentionally go downwind, like say at the start of a search. I may do that at some point in the search if I think we're missing something, to see if they can pick something else up. But I often see that I get those really nice head whips when they pass odor and all of a sudden realize it and turn around, as opposed to having a bunch of odor blowing in their face at the beginning. Mm-hmm. Although that can give you really good information too, if you can, and I've had this at trial where I'm standing at the start line, seeing my dog go, oh, odor over there. Oh, odor over there. But it's also complex and they're having to pick between odors.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different kind of heuristics people throw around out there. One thing that you'll hear is work with the wind blowing to you if there's one hide, and working with the wind blowing away from you if there's more than one hide. So what that kind of is getting at is that it's not straightforward whether you should always work one way or the other. Sometimes the environment will give you information about that. Another way that I've put it to my students before is, if I have a dog with 0 hunt drive, I need the wind blowing in my face so he smells it. If I have a dog with a lot of hunt drive, then I can work either direction, but working with the wind allows my dog to do exactly what Natalie says. And since we're starting from a point of view where hunt drive comes first, we're basically working with the wind is a great way to do it. That's not how you do hunting or anything like that.
Right, but nose work is much more artificial that it works.
Yeah, yes, it is. But also, Yeah, that it's artificial, but the point is, the reason you wouldn't do that for hunting has nothing to do with nose work. It has to do with birds
The
can
other
smell
animal,
you.
yeah.
Yeah, the birds can smell you approaching if you do it that way.
The birch isn't smelling your dog.
No. Yeah, so that's my main advice for that. You
And
should
so
know
much-
your dog. You should be able to do it either way. You should be able to get to the point with your dog where it doesn't matter. But strategy-wise, there are times where I'll pick one or the other
Mhm.
for time reasons. If I have a time crunch, I may choose to work with the wind blowing in my face.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
my dog can go boom, 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 boom.
If I know, especially if I know there's one hide and I want a really good time, I'm going to try to utilize that. But it doesn't always help that much. And so much of the time, wind is swirling around in crazy, up and down circles and all this stuff that it's not as clean cut as you'd like, and it doesn't make a big difference.
Yeah.
Where you start. But there are things that do make a big difference, like going to walls if there are walls in the search area and things like that.
Yeah.
Allowing
absolutely.
your dog the time to work around to the other side of a vehicle if they need to, and training that so that they can do it for themselves, not you doing it for them.
Yeah, I do think also that when you start using these kinds of rules about starting upwind or downwind, and you take them too seriously and start thinking for your dog, that always ends up bad. It's fine when you say, I'm going to start upwind, I'm going to start downwind, and you don't take it too seriously and you let the dog work. But if you're like trying to force the dog to work upwind because that's what you heard on some video on YouTube, then that's always a bad idea.
Yeah, and I've seen people try to get to the downwind side while just walking there and not watching their dog. And the dog's like, what? Odor back there. So that is not the way to do it. If you're going to, within the search, decide you're going to go somewhere else to try to give them a better angle, really pay attention to them while you're doing it. Stay connected to the search. Don't just be going somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So if there are any follow-up questions on that, feel free to post them. Otherwise, we will move to the next question. Question number 3. So this is a longer question, so I'm actually going to read it off of my NAMA document, but this is the gist of the email. And if I'm misunderstanding the question, feel free to clarify it. I remember you once telling me that a good way to train blind hides was to run blind paired hides so that your dog self-rewards. And it doesn't matter so much if you're late in reading him, believing him, knowing exactly where the hide is, or waiting for the instructor to confirm, etc. I was going to ask my instructor to do that for Hobo and me in class today, as I have not been doing blind hides at all with him and have probably been unconsciously giving him all kinds of cues where to search and more specifically where the hides are. Also, I have not trained Hobo to be familiar with how I change as a handler at a trial, when I act different because I don't know where the hides are. You did not mention blind paired hides as an option last night. Have you changed your mind? Shall I hold off asking my instructor till I know if you still think that is a good idea? Also, there's another question that's related to it that I didn't put as its own question, so I'll add it to this, which is what's the best way to transition to blind hides for a person who only does known hides? So the first thing I want to say about this is that I omit information regularly. I don't cover everything in a sweeping way. So sometimes I don't include something. That doesn't mean I don't do it anymore or not. The other thing is just because I do something or don't, it's the logic behind it, whether that makes sense to you or not, that's more important, rather than whether I do it or not. If the logic of what you're doing makes sense to you, then you should keep doing it. If that makes sense to you and makes you happy, okay? I almost never do blind hides with my dogs, okay? So I think what we were talking about last time at NAMA, and this is a question about the last NAMA.
It was actually from the video blitz.
Oh, it was from the video blitz. Okay, what was it exactly? Do you remember?
Nope. I'm sure.
I think it was a video where we were debating about whether or not the search was blind.
It could be, and then we were talking about the way in which like footwork and stuff can be different when people are blind versus not blind and things like that. You can go back and watch the video.
Yeah, the video. If you haven't seen it, make sure to check it out because this question is referring to that.
And we talked quite a bit about blind.
That's the first thing to say, is that understand the logic behind why you're doing what you're doing. Don't just do things. Have a good understanding of why you're doing it. That to me is more important than just doing things. Because otherwise it feels like you're reaching around in the dark and hoping you're grabbing things that are good and hoping you're not grabbing things that are bad. And that's dangerous. But if you are like, okay, why are you doing blind hides that are paired? Why are you doing that?
Well, I think she tried to list some of the reasons within the question.
And do those reasons still make sense to you? Now, for me, like I said, I almost never do blind hides with my dogs. So the blind hides that I do with my dogs are limited basically to trials and to workshops. That's about it. The reason is I'm more interested in training my dog to be good. I made enough handler mistakes with my first dog that I learned everything I needed to learn. They say in agility that you always ruin your first dog, and I'm sure they have that saying in a lot of other sports. But in nose work, I think it's very true. You have to train yourself to be a good trainer and a good handler with your first dog. So I did a lot of blind searches with Lumi, and she was ruined.
But you also built other good things, not through the
mostly
blind hide
myself.
Part, but I think that some of this came down to not being molded in your training, maybe in a way that was most helpful. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I do want to say that sometimes with your first dog, you allow them to become a stronger dog in nose work because you don't know everything that you're doing as a handler.
Yeah.
And then with later dogs, we cover for them.
The way your dog responds to you being a bad handler is different because every dog's different, sure. But my point is, you're never each dog makes you a better handler. So by definition, if you've become a better handler because of your first dog, that means when you started your first dog, you were a worse handler, right? And that means your dog had to suffer some amount for that. And some of that is good. And we talk a lot about in our classes and our videos and our workshops, we talk about intentionally playing a bad handler to give the dog some of those good experiences. But a lot of those experiences are just negative. They're just sitting and not getting paid, right? Or getting pulled off of a hide because your handler wasn't sure, right? Those kinds of things. They're
things
just
that erode odor obedience.
that they're bad and they ruin your dog, and there is absolutely no way to avoid it. You have to make those mistakes. If your trainer stopped you from making those mistakes, you wouldn't learn from them, and you would actually be held back even further. So maybe your dog would be better, but you as a handler wouldn't grow, right? And so there's a trade-off there. So yeah, in terms of doing blind searches, that's my belief on blind searches. Now, if you're gonna do blind searches, there are ways to make them not hurt so much. So the other question was, how do you transition from working non-blind to blind? So the first thing that I've been doing differently, because I know handlers have to do this, I've been doing blind searches on food. And I've been doing a lot of blind searches on food before I transitioned to odor. And we've been doing all the way up to NW3 level blind searches with my students and having them compete against each other. And this is great because it's really hard to screw up the dog this way. Yeah, you could pull them off of their food, but you're not going to diminish their drive for food. And I'm going to once I tell you to do that, the dog's going to run right back to that food and eat it. So in a way, it actually only builds resilience.
Yeah, because the problem with odor is that it's, a substance that's meaningless to them until we build meaning for it. And so if we're building meaning a little bit in this class, and then the next class we destroy the value of the odor because we're pulling them off of it, we're ignoring it, we're annoyed when they go back, we're building a very wishy-washy, unsecure relationship with odor, feeling towards odor. And so it's really important to kind of safeguard that odor obedience so that they will respond the way you want them to respond in competition. So if you can make some of those mistakes on food, you're not diminishing their odor obedience.
So now I want to also make one caveat about what I said earlier. There is another category. So I'll do blind searches when I'm at trial and when I'm at workshops. And I'll also do blind searches for fun. So I want to make sure to mention this, that blind searches are fun. And they are part of what makes nose work fun. And so if you enjoy them, you shouldn't not do them because they are bad for training. That's like saying, well, I'm not going to play actual basketball games because I'm going to make mistakes and I don't want to practice those mistakes. So I'm just going to do drills. It's like, no, the whole point is for you to go have fun and play basketball. And the drills just make you better. So don't stop doing fun blind searches, but don't I think the training value of blind searches it's not there so much.
Yeah, so we train well so that we can ruin it in competition.
Yes.
So we can go back and train well some more.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way of putting it. The whole focus is so that you can go out and have fun with the dog. So anyways, the next way to introduce blind searches to the dogs is to play fun games that have lower stakes. So that's why we came up with Shoulda, Woulda, Coulda. Check out the video on Patreon if you haven't seen it. So it's basically Natalie and I are competing against each other. I've got my dog Lumi, and neither of us know where the hide is. Whoever calls it first wins. If you're too slow, you lose. So it puts a whole different spin on Nosework. I could still pull my dog off a voter, sure, but if Natalie's paying attention, we won't leave our dog hanging and like, I'm not sure, I'm not confident enough to call it because I'm worried she's going to call it first. And if she calls it first, then I lose. So we're blurt alerting more and we're going to false more. And that's a good thing in this situation. I know a lot of you are voting on the I'd rather miss a hide than not false alert. I think there's a period of training where falsing is way more desirable because you don't want to miss it in case it's true because you're still building the dog up.
And falsing in the way that you do in this game and in some of the other games,
false.
It's not a real false. You're being competitive and you're trying to be quick, but it's not like you think the dog lied to you and are upset about it after. At least it shouldn't be. And it doesn't have the same stakes that it does in competition in like a trial where it blows your entire title. So it's a way of helping you read the dog better and get over some of your holding back on calling anything fears so that you can read better and call better in competition. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I had something else I forgot what it was.
Okay. So the next way to do blind searches are blind with help. Well, a lot of people call blind with help, and that's where your instructor will coach you through it and make sure that you don't miss the hide. If you take a millisecond too long, they're going to say you're missing it, or they're going to prompt you to call it or something like that. Those are good. But here's the problem with blind with help kind of stuff is that it doesn't produce, if you feel comfortable because there's a safety net behind you, then you're not going to train your dog to handle stress. You have to feel like you could fail and you could ruin your dog, and all of those negative emotions, they're part of what trial is, and they're part of what your dog has to get accustomed to. So when I'm a trainer, I do make sure I throw my students out there with no safety net occasionally. So that
there has to be a balance.
Yeah, and that's what we do on our game days, which is usually once a month. They do a game day or less, yeah. And then the rest of is just drills. So there's that. So let's talk about pairing a blind hide. The nice thing about pairing a blind hide is that your dog gets a reward when they get to odor, right? There's also tends to be a more dramatic change of behavior when the dog hits the odor cone because they're working for a primary reinforcer and it's more valuable to them. So it helps you read the dog a little bit more. So all of that is good. However, you can still make a lot of the same mistakes. After the dog eats the treat, now it's not paired anymore. Now it's just a normal blind search. And if you missed it, you missed it. So you can still not pay the dog and pull the dog off and all these things that we don't want to do. So it's a good way to make it slightly less dangerous, but it doesn't absolve you of the danger of blind searches entirely. There's no way to absolve all the dangers of blind searches, and you have to do them. So you just have to just do them.
Well, and like you said in your question, you want your dog to know what you're like when you're going to be in trial. Mm-hmm. If the first time your dog ever sees you crazy and not knowing where the hides are is in trial, they're not going to be able to work and communicate normally. But I personally probably paired blind is lowest tier on my blind searches, my blind safety net searches, because we did a game day a couple years ago where, at least in my search and one of the other ones, I don't know if in all of them, because we had a few judges there, we allowed people to bring us their treats and we would pair them before the search if they wanted. And I saw almost nobody saw their dog eat the food. I had to tell them, oh, by the way, your dog is eating the food there. And then they'll go, oh, and start rewarding them. So to me, I didn't like it. And I didn't feel like it had a ton of value. Like, yeah, the dog was like, oh, look, there's food here. But they didn't get the celebration from the owner in the same way.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that the handler got what they needed from it, which in my mind was reading the dog better. They were not reading the dog.
Yeah.
And the dogs also, obviously, were not alerting because they were eating. And so the handler the reason they weren't calling it is because they weren't seeing an alert.
Which is good in a way because they shouldn't rely on those alerts to begin with.
They should have been paying more attention, but it's not something they knew how to do yet. So, I think maybe in some contexts it could be used with a lot of value. And maybe, if I had known how little the handlers would see, I may have prepped them to be more ready when the dog was eating. But you would think a dog sitting there eating multiple treats off of a hide would be fairly obvious, but it wasn't for whatever reason. Maybe they're thinking about the next place they're going in the search or whatever. So there may be value there. I just, I haven't found it yet. I prefer initially to do a blind with help where I tell people when the dog gets to source so that they can, maybe for the first 1 or 2 times they're doing blind. But I also really, my sort of go-to is describing the search. And so what I want to do is to get the handler describing what they see in the dog. Yeah. Because usually if I can get them doing that, they can know by the time their dog gets to source that they're there because they have been able to truly interpret the changes of behavior that precede getting to source. Now that can take a number of repetitions because at first it tends to be that people just want to describe things they think are odor related. And so they're not seeing everything that's happening. And they're often not super accurate about what's related to odor or not. But with just a little practice of that, they get it. And because they're saying it out loud, their brain is actually learning something. Yeah. And so then they become much more accurate blind handlers. And so I feel like that's my favorite transition. Yeah. And in terms of transitioning your dog's understanding of you not knowing where the hides are, I really, really pester my students about not showing the dogs where the hides are. So make your feet point at your dog. Do not wander over to that hide because you think the dog should have found it already. A lot of stuff of just not trying to not let my handlers point out hides to the dog and just follow the dog, work with the search area. Don't work with the hides. So anytime I see handlers working the hides, I try to interrupt it and get them working with the dog again. Because I think that the dog doesn't just need to see what you are like in blind searches. They need you to not show them where hides are all the time because that's not good for their learning how to hunt independently.
So you need to learn, like if your main worry is that you're cueing your dog in non-blind searches, then you need to figure out how not to do that in non-blind searches because that's what's hurting your dog. And doing blind searches will not fix that. You'll start cueing your dog in other ways.
Yeah, into falses, or just not knowing how to follow them because you don't follow them normally.
Yeah. So to add to that, my preferred way of doing blind searches is to just muster up the courage to not be afraid of being wrong and just call everything that I see. And that doesn't mean I call frivolously. It's that I'm really working extra hard to not miss it. That, like, I imagine that someone has a high charge shock collar on my neck. And if I miss the hide, they're going to buzz me. So I'm watching. I don't want to be wrong, but I really don't want to miss it. Right. And so if I get myself to that, then I can do blind searches and pretty much help my dog. And I get a lot more falses, but it's okay for me.
The other way I like to do it is to do what we call self-verified searches.
Sure.
Where you're not actually calling alert.
But that's not necessarily, well, you could do that paired, but I would be worried about doing that as a transition to blind hides for the first time you're doing blind hides.
Yeah, so I'm not saying this is the first time you do blind hides. I'm saying maybe you've gone through the other couple things that we mentioned. And so I wouldn't want to put a number on it, but you've done some blind hides. You're semi-confident on blind hides. You can read your dog catching odor and all that. Because in that search, you don't call alert. you and your dog tells you where the hide is, and then you go and physically find the hide and pay them on it. And so you're not getting to fall back on the judge. You're not getting to call alert. You are hunting with your dog. Yeah. And I think that can put people in a better frame of mind, both about hunting with their dog and about really reading where the dog is alerting, and interpreting that instead of like, oh yeah, it's probably the corner of this table, but is it there, or is it dead center under the table? So yeah, not as a first step to blind hides, but that's one that I like. If I'm going to practice blind hides, I would rather do that than just like a straight competition search.
Now, to reference another video that we've done, because I've been referencing a ton of videos that we've done. If you're interested in seeing how I transition to blind searches, watch our starting from scratch videos. I've done several blind searches with my dogs, and that's every nosework session he's ever done on camera right there. And so you've seen me expose him to blind searches, how I did it, how we took it. And now that he's getting ready for competition, once we go on odor, I probably won't do another blind search with him until the ORT. I will just be drilling him so that when we go to the ORT, we knock it out of the park. That's my whole goal. I won't do any preparatory blind searches. I don't need to. I know that if I train him right, and I read him right, that will pass.
Yeah, and I also realize that, novice handlers need exposure to blind searches to know that they can do it and to know what they're seeing to be able to be successful. And so it's, us as people who have both trialed like 6 different dogs, that we can say we no longer feel the need to do blind searches. Yeah. But I think you don't want to go overboard with them, even if you're a novice handler.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you can do a lot more damage than the benefit that you're giving yourself.
Yeah, you need to do them. They're going to damage your dog. So just do as little as you need to do. Do as little damage as you have to.
And also spend time really watching other dogs. Spend time watching videos where you don't know where the hide is.
You can get almost all of the benefit from doing blind searches with your dog by going and spectating a whole trial and just watching all of other people do blind searches. Then you get at least to do 4 blind searches where you're watching and you don't know where the hide is yet. And then you get to watch 100 other searches where you do know where the hide is, but you're watching a handler handle blind. And that's almost as good as running your own dog.
And I review videos for people regularly. And so every time I do that, the first time I watch it through, I use it as an exercise for myself to say, okay, I see how the dog is working the wind. I see how they're bracketing. I think that the hide is there. Oh, the dog alerted there. And then the handler called it, and then yes or no. So I get to test myself regularly without testing my dog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And building, the eyes for it, because it really, it's just another language that we don't really understand yet, or we're unwilling to commit to because we're afraid of being wrong. And so you just need to, immerse yourself in that language and learn it.
Yep. Is there anything else to be said about that?
We'll move on to the next one.
Okay. Last question. Let's take a look. And then we'll read through some of these comments. Oh, this is a long one. I got to get close to the screen to read it. I have a question about the concept that every time we set a hide, we're teaching our dogs about hide placement. I never put a hide under a vehicle and very rarely do an inaccessible hide on a vehicle. My dogs will go under a vehicle and do all sorts of pretzel techniques to source the hide that is in a wheel well, but pulling under the vehicle. How can I teach them odor isn't going to be under the vehicle? Okay, this is a good question and really helps bring to the forefront some of the misunderstandings of pattern training. Because the misunderstanding is that dogs think of things the same way we do. So I never set a hide under a vehicle or inaccessible on a vehicle, but guess what? The dog doesn't care that it's a car if you're setting inaccessible hides under things in other searches, right? So I set hides under things all the time in searches and ask my dog under a table, under a chair, go under this, and the dog has to crawl under things to find that hide, and I encourage it because it's confidence building. But guess what? They generalize that. They extrapolate it to the car. Just because I've never put a hide under a vehicle in a car, it doesn't mean the dog's not going to take the lesson they learned inside the building or in the park where they had to crawl under a park bench, right? They're going to extrapolate that to the vehicle. So there's no way to teach a dog that odor is not going to be under a vehicle, especially because it is going to be under a vehicle. And it's going to be under a vehicle by accident because the wind takes it there, and it's going to be there on purpose because some COs are going to put it there and they're going to say it's inaccessible. But your dog has drive to source. So the only thing you can do is not let them go. Tighten up your leash and don't let them go. And eventually the dog will learn that they're not allowed to go. That's a problem, in my opinion. I don't actually stop my dog from going under, or get a dog that's too big to fit under a vehicle. That's the easiest way. You've got a real problem if you got dachshunds, and they can just scoot right under every vehicle. But yeah, dogs are learning from every hide placement, and they're sometimes learning things that we don't expect. That's the whole problem of patterning, is that our dogs are putting pieces together that we don't even know that they're putting together.
And that's the problem if you're not paying attention to your hide setting, because you're setting expectations that you're not thinking about, and you're teaching your dog. Say you spend like a year only setting hides in kind of the center section of a large room. Your dog's not going to ever check the walls because there's never been a hide at the walls. There's no reason to do that. Then you go to a trial and there's wall hides. Your dog's probably not going to find them. Yeah. Or you never set hides at the threshold, or when you have a threshold hide, you back your dog up 10 feet.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people who do that.
How to find a hide that's right next to you when you're started. They're not even searching because it's not efficient to be searching then if they don't need to necessarily, depending on the dog and the situation, what they've learned. So they're going to wait until the normal time that they start working odor in a search, which is maybe 5 to 10 feet into the search. But vehicles, like I've seen plenty of well, I know that an early NW3 I did with Cinnamon, Ron had an engine block hide. Certainly there was odor under the car. There was a recent NW2 where the hide was right behind the wheel. Say you set it just kind of under the car, just barely under, so you can't see it, and the wind is blowing through the car. Almost all of the odor is going to be under that car and then pushing out the other side. And so the dog is that's what they're gonna see when they get there. And like Michael was saying, you tighten up on the leash, let them learn how to get themselves around to the other side of the car without doing it for them, like I already said, so that they can go, oh, this is what odor looks like when it's on the other side. I know mom's not going to let me go under, so I will take myself around because that will get me there faster. And I think that is hugely important problem solving for vehicles, because vehicles trip people up when the dog doesn't know how to problem solve the parts of a vehicle. And the way that they interact with odor and the way the wind interacts and what the handler is going to allow them or not allow them to do. If you stop your dog from going around, you're going to get a false alert or fringe. Whether that's taken by the judge or not is beside the point. But I don't want to get upset that my dog wants to go under the car. I lost first place overall because
I was going to bring that story up too. She lost first place to me. Thank you very much. Yeah, she let her dog go under a car a little bit. A trailer. Actually, and she went got a fall
all the way under, from one side to the other under the car to source the hide on the wheel on this side. And interestingly, I went back and watched the video later. She was on the side with the hide, caught odor, flew around to the other side of it was a long trailer, and then under the car. And I was probably 10 feet back from her because she tends to run her searches and I.
But every judge that gives you a fall, another judge will give you pronounced.
Right.
For that same thing. So.
And you know what? I wouldn't go back and stop her if I could. She was driving to odor beautifully, happily. I wasn't worried about her safety with the height of that trailer or anything. And we got our NW3 Elite that day. It would have been nice to with the first place, but at least Michael got it.
Yeah.
That's just the odor picture the dog is going to get sometimes.
I would also like to elaborate on what I said earlier about tightening up the leash and not letting the dog go. Don't extrapolate that to mean correct the dog or tell the dog no or something like that. Just put pressure on the leash. Don't let the dog go under.
Match their pressure no more than matching their pressure.
I saw this the other day. I see this more with dogs going up on a vehicle and jumping on a vehicle. I see a lot of people correcting the dog no and jerking them off. Like that. I don't recommend that. I think you've got to be careful to not diminish your dog's drive. And
also more likely to actually do damage.
You're actually going to damage the vehicle that way. Exactly.
And if I say I am not like the story I just told, but I'm with my dog, I'm in a position where I could stop them from going under the car. I'm still going to let them probably get at least shoulders deep under the car. I want them to be able to get the best picture they can. And then I'm just going to match their pressure, not let them have any more than that, and let them figure out where they need to go to get around. And as soon as they're not pulling under the car anymore, I'm loosening up again, because I want them to feel free to go around either way or behind us, depending on what the odor is actually doing. So yeah, you have to be very careful with things like that, but you also shouldn't feel afraid to put the brakes on a little bit. Sometimes where your dog wants to go is not safe.
Yeah.
And so you should find kind ways of stopping them that also, aren't punishing and diminishing their odor obedience or their love of searching or anything like that.
Absolutely.
There are ways to fairly communicate to them, sorry, not that way, but I will let you work to odor.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that if there are any follow-up questions, let us know, but I think that's a good place to end that question there.
I mean, the only other thing I would say about that is you're going to encounter that in other searches too, where you just can't let your dog go the way they want to go to work the odor because there's a drop-off or they said you couldn't, there are breakable things there or something. So it's a useful skill for them to have. But I mean, I think being mindful of your hide placement is like the thing to do as someone who sets hides in nose work.
Yes.
Of making sure you're getting a good balance of floor, ground hides, medium height hides, a little bit where the dog's having to stretch up to them, where they have to push into things deep, where it's right out in the open, where they're really problem solving, where, it's not as challenging, any variation you can think of, with emphasizing a few things a bit more, like emphasizing thresholds, emphasizing corners, emphasizing the places that, if the dog doesn't do it by themselves, you're probably going to miss something. Whereas like a hide in the middle of the room, they're probably not going to miss unless you stop them from getting there. But corners and thresholds and things, it's very, very common to miss that. And so be mindful about, maintaining those sorts of things. And even things like vehicles. I've been talking to some people recently where their dogs were having trouble problem solving around vehicles. Take the time to set problems on vehicles for your dog to solve so that they are fluent in that hide problem and can do it without you taking them to the hide.
Yeah, and if you ever have a location or a place that you can do off-leash vehicles, go out of your way to do that. It's a really valuable experience.
I've done that in trial, and it was a blast. I think I've done it twice in trial. It's probably my favorite thing to do off-leash.
It's not as hard to find as you'd think. A lot of churches have fenced-in parking areas. A lot of let's see, where else could you put them up? If you have someone with a really big garage, or a barn, if you can find someone who lives a little bit on the outskirts and has a barn that you can drive vehicles into. We pulled
the vehicle into Patty's Quonset hut a couple times. Pulled the vehicle into our garage here.
Yep. Yeah. So something to think about. Okay. So I'm going to go through here, and you're going to keep kind of like a rough tally.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So Dave says false is way worse. It undermines confidence and adds confusion to communication between dog and handler. Bad training all around. Good comments. Liz says, I don't like missing a hide. I can usually see her change of behavior, but just can't work through it. But false alerting doesn't bother me as much. I don't know what's in the environment or what's happening with odor. That's another good comment. You don't always know. A lot of times false alerts aren't that the dog's wrong. It's just something in the environment's going on.
So for her, it's not as confidence diminishing as it may be for other people.
Yeah. Usually the no leads to the real hide for me, or realization that I'm in odor or already found one. This is from Brenda. So I would rather false than leave one, but I think the untreated alert is harder for my dog. That's interesting. So you think if your dog false alerts and you don't treat them, that's hard for them? Or that if you miss, that you miss the dog alerting. Yeah, and so I wasn't even going that far. I was just saying you missed the hide. Maybe your dog never got to it, right? But that's a good point. If your dog gets to it and you miss it, that's pretty bad.
Rough.
Katie says, personally, I think false alert is worse. I feel like there's potential confusion with the dog's training, and it causes confidence issues for me.
Yeah, and I think with both Katie and Dave's comments, for me, it depends on what the false was. Did my dog false alert, or did I just call something because I wanted to call something? Because those are two very different scenarios for me.
Absolutely. Definitely. And I definitely sympathize for the people who talking about confidence being lost on the false alert. I went through a long streak of false alerts that really shattered my confidence. But not every false alert hurts you the same way. I've had plenty of false alerts that I didn't care about whatsoever. And then I've had false alerts that have devastated me. And so context matters too.
Yeah.
So anyways, I'd rather miss a hide than false alert. This is from Patty. Since I think it damages my relationship with my dog, once I get that no, I am more cautious calling the next alert and maybe even the next few alerts in various searches, so I become slower, which would potentially confuse my dog when I delay calling alert after my dog has told me about it.
Yeah, I think one important thing we can do as handlers, and I know this is incredibly difficult, is to try to learn how to not swing way the opposite direction when something happens. So moving towards being very, very slow because we called the false, or moving towards being very, very fast because we didn't call it fast enough.
Yeah.
Because neither of those are great.
Ping-ponging between the two opposite ends is not the solution.
Yeah.
There is a balance point.
Yeah.
Melissa says, for me, I feel worse when I false alert as I called the hide wrong. If I miss a hide, I do not have the same feeling of being wrong. So let me throw a wrench in that for you. One is that your dog could also just be mistaken. So maybe you called it right because the dog was legitimately alerting. They were just not within the criteria of what was being accepted for that hide. And then on the other side, if you miss a hide, you don't have the same feeling of being wrong. But what if it's your fault that you never got to the hide? So it could go either way on both sides.
Yeah, so I got to run in our Valentine's Nosework games yesterday because someone couldn't come very last minute. So I was the partner for one of the people who could come. And so I ran Hazel, and I think it was in our first search. She found a hide under a chair. I called it, and then I turned away. And as soon as I did it, I went, I bet there's another chair hide, and I just pulled her off of it. And then come to find out, it was a search with rounds where I got to go back in a couple times. There was, and I had. And so that is something where that was entirely me. Missing that hide was totally me. And we did eventually work back to it. But I felt much worse about that than a hide that we did miss, because I told her to move off of that hide dramatically. Whereas if I had just allowed her to work, I think she may have worked to it from there.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least would have had a better chance of working to it because I pulled her like halfway across the room.
Yeah, you did.
It was one of those adrenaline searches. But I had somewhere I wanted to go.
That's true. So now, Stephanie says, false alert can be part of learning, so can missing a hide. You can fix both, part of the journey. So she says they're both the same. They're all a whole part of becoming a better nosework handler. Good answer.
Which is true whether you want it to be or not.
Amira says, I'd rather miss a hide than false. It wouldn't be the end of the world if I falsed, but it would be a blow to my confidence. So
That's a common theme.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was another comment on YouTube that I lost. It was in the first part before we got cut off that said something along the lines of, it's no big deal for a false. So she was on the, I don't mind missing a hide. Do you know where we kind of ended up on the
I think we're at like 6 people voting for false alerts and 4 people voting for missing hides.
Okay, that's about what I expected.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So thank you for commenting. That was very interesting discussion that led to. Dave says Stephanie wins. It's all part of the journey. That's definitely true. Start sending us your questions for next month. If you want to have your question featured on NAMA, the quicker you get it in, the more likely you're going to be. If you're higher up on our Patreon tiers, then you're also more likely to get your question in. Submit videos for our video review blitz for next month. We've got plenty of videos stocked up, but you can always get on the list if you want your video reviewed. It's a good way to get a free video review in. If you know someone who is nervous about doing online video analysis, is a great way to initiate them in if they're worried about it. Keep an eye on our events. Webinars coming up. You have something?
And we'll put this in the newsletter, of course, but the next video review blitz is scheduled for March 16th at 8 p.m. And then the next NAMA is scheduled for March 30th, also at 8 p.m. And we are planning it's a little last minute. So quickly planning a trip to California. It's looking like it's going to be March 20th through 23rd.
Spread the word.
So if you're in California, we would love to see you guys. And we want to, be able to actually do some classes and workshops and whatever people are interested in. So I've put a post about it up on Facebook where I'm trying to gather information of what people are interested in. So if you're in that area and would like to come to something or know someone that you could, just let them know about it. We'd love to connect with you.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And we will see you next month.
Bye.